Welcome to this episode of Automotive Insiders. I'm your host, Jason Stein. Great to have you back listening again. Today, we're taking a forward-looking view at the automotive industry through the lens that matters most to suppliers: the stability of production, shifts in customer strategy, and where real opportunity exists in 2026. The key point to understand right now is this: the industry is not entering a disruption phase, it's entering a transition phase. Growth remains, but volatility has replaced predictability, and suppliers are being asked to navigate multiple forces at once, including policy uncertainty, affordability pressure on consumers, and the rapid diversification of vehicle technologies. And while OEM strategies can pivot quarter to quarter, suppliers are making decisions that must hold up for years, including tooling, capital allocation, workforce planning, and long-cycle innovation investments. In many ways, suppliers have become the stabilizing force of the industry. So today, we step back to examine the macro forces shaping supplier demand and investment decisions in 2026. My guest today is David Oakley, manager of the Americas Vehicle Sales Forecasting for GlobalData. He will walk us through what it means for suppliers, including flexibility mattering more than specialization and regionalization mattering more than globalization. Efficiency will matter more than sheer volume growth. It's David Oakley coming up on this episode of Automotive Insiders. David Oakley, it's a pleasure to have you back on the program. Welcome in.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Good to be here.
We're talking a lot about a forward-looking view of the auto industry, mostly through the lens that matters most to suppliers, which is stability of production, customer strategy shifts, and really where the real opportunity exists in 2026. Give us the lay of the land, if you will. I know you believe the industry is entering a transition phase, maybe not even so much a disruption phase. Can you describe that for me?
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment of what we're looking at going into 2026. I mean, I think we obviously had a huge amount of disruption last year, and really what we see for 2026 is more of a stabilization phase. But having said that, I think there are still some potential disruptors on the horizon as well. So for one, we could see some disruption coming from USMCA negotiation. We can probably talk about that later on, and another, potential we could see disruption to supply from things like DRAM chips or further sort of aluminum shortages, that sort of thing. But for the most part, I think we see things calming down a little bit after all the craziness of 2025. So we're looking at a similar kind of total industry volume from a sales perspective as we saw in 2025. So we'd be looking at around a 16.2 million SAAR this year. So that would be down just very slightly, maybe even less than 1% over 2025. So maybe that's some reasonably good news for suppliers, in that it does seem like maybe a little bit more stability could be coming along.
Well, David, I know your view is that OEM strategies change quickly. Your position is that suppliers might be the industry's stabilizing force. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, suppliers obviously can play that role. I think in terms of OEM strategies, yes, they can pivot quickly, but then sometimes the implementation is what takes longer. So, I mean, in some ways, some of the decisions we see now, some of the changes we see in sourcing and that kind of thing, some of that's still, playing out based on decisions that were made pre-tariffs being announced. So there is a sense in which, these things do sometimes move a little bit slowly, and, the OEMs and the suppliers that come out on top of this are going to be the ones that can just effectively manage the risks, really, and have kind of that ability to flex in the short term whilst also keeping an eye on the long term, and not sort of overreacting and panicking, I think, because that could be a real risk this year. Could be overreacting when, potential seemingly negative headlines come along. We have to be careful not to have knee-jerk reactions to some of these events.
Let's talk about some of those negative headlines. Number one, of course, tariffs. Give me the real impact versus the perceived impact. I know that tariffs, in your view, have created an uneven pressure rather than a universal disruption. Tell me a little bit about that, David.
Yeah, so I think I don't know how people are perceiving things now, but certainly when we were first talking about this, perhaps a year ago or so, there was certainly a lot of panic in the industry and a lot of concern that this could end up, taking as much as 1 million units off the SAR last year. Actually, if anything, what we saw was a more positive outcome than we were even predicting before we saw the tariffs coming. So what we saw was actually sales were pulled forward last year, and actually it turned out to be the best year that we've had sales-wise since the pandemic. So certainly from that point of view, it hasn't had the impact that we thought it would. Now, that's not to say that there hasn't been, like you said, some pressures on the back end, and we've seen costs rise across the industry for suppliers, for OEMs, and there's been a significant amount of absorption of that because there has been this view that we just, as an industry, we can't pass that on to consumers. They've already taken all the price rises that they really can over the last few years. So if we go any further, we're going to see significant volume reduction. So therefore, it has been very varied. Obviously, some of those tariffs that were first threatened didn't actually come about, or if they did, sometimes they're at a lower level percentage-wise than what we initially modeled based on. And we're still seeing some uncertainty even right now over, things like the Korean situation. There was a threat to re-up those tariffs to 25%. They're currently at 15%. Similar thing with Europe, even over something as disconnected to the auto industry as Greenland. You really couldn't have foreseen any of this coming maybe a year or two ago. But I think the overall message is, yeah, like you said, it is going to vary very much depending on your exact exposure to these things. Are you primarily involved with very import dependent OEMs? Are you working more with domestic manufacturers? And we have seen generally the OEMs that have done better, at least I can speak to that, have been tended to be the ones that are larger and able to cope more with these big swings, whereas some of the smaller, more import dependent OEMs had a bit more of a challenging 2025. And although that could stabilize a little bit in 2026, I wouldn't expect the overall trend to necessarily disappear that much.
Supplier implications versus supplier opportunity. I know when it comes to opportunity, you believe that there is an advantage to be gained with USMCA sourcing rules. Tell me a little bit about your view there and also implications, including localization requirements.
Yeah, so I mean, the USMCA is obviously a big question mark heading into 2026. We have, the review coming up. Still remains to be seen what happens there. And I think, at the moment, I certainly think what suppliers can do is really keep an eye on the headlines, but as I kind of referred to earlier, without panicking. I don't think we need to see any, knee-jerk reactions when there's potential bumps in the road, because I think it is going to be a bumpy road renegotiating this treaty and or this trade agreement, and we could see, a lot of toing and froing in negotiations and threats going on. So really, I think localization is going to be the key. I think honestly, one way to approach it would be to say even focusing as much production as possible within the US. I mean, we don't even know whether there will be as favorable an outcome from these negotiations as what the industry has been used to over the past, 30 years. So if you're supplying a lot of companies in the US, having that production within the US is the most surefire way probably to avoid these tariff implications. Now, having said that, we certainly are hoping for a better outcome than that from the USMCA, and I think a key takeaway for suppliers would be to make sure. I'm sure that probably they know this already, but to make sure they are compliant with the current rules, but also, doing what they can to try and anticipate what may happen, whether it is increased, localization requirements or different rules around labor and pay and all these kinds of issues, which have been, some of the main pillars of the existing agreement, and that could even be, tightened up further as we see this renegotiated.
Let's talk a little bit about OEM winners and losers in terms of market share. And what I want to do is frame it around strategic positioning, not necessarily predictions. Where are the potential share gains, or how could potential share gains be realized, and where are some of the share challenges?
Yeah, so in terms of gains, I think one of the things that we haven't touched on yet, but will be a key feature and has been a key feature of the market in recent months is the EV transition, and perhaps what we would have previously described as being more of a straight line towards electrification has become more of a case of we're really seeing diversification of powertrain, and we are seeing a continuation in BEV, but really a flattening out, a plateauing, at least in the short term, of market share for BEVs. And perhaps you see other fuel types like a full hybrid really picking up some of that slack. So the reason I mention that really is to say that I think just product positioning will be key. Obviously, with those BEV tax credits having gone away last fall, what we've really seen is that models are having to stand and fall on their own merits. It's very much a demand-based situation now, and so just having the right product in the market at the right time is going to count for a lot. I mean, what we've seen is that compact SUVs, affordable, the combination of affordability and practicality of some of those models, that is what the consumer is really demanding right now. To some extent, we've seen some success from maybe your more compact and mid-sized pickups rather than some of the full-size pickups, which have become so expensive these days. So, just keeping an eye on that affordability. I think really managing incentives wisely and judiciously is what is going to be key for OEMs this year. So, making sure that they're boxing clever really with having the key times of year, perhaps around some of the key holidays and sales events, but maybe also being judicious and not overspending to try and move certain vehicles. So that can obviously then have knock-on consequences for production. I'm sure the OEMs are going to be keeping a close eye, as always, on days supply, making sure that they're not getting overstocked with certain models, which just perhaps aren't seeing the level of demand that we previously saw. And obviously, EVs are going to be probably at the top of that list this year, as we see a little bit of a cooling off there of demand.
Bit of a cooling off, but also still growth. Finally, give us a little bit of your view on the EV and hybrid outlook for this year. Electrification continues, but the path is now, as I think you've said, multi-speed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, really, our view at GlobalData is that we'll probably see a pretty flat outcome with regard to BEV sales this year, or BEV market share, I should say. So that's around 8% of the US market. And that really is going to be a little bit varied as well as we go through the year. We've obviously seen a slow start from BEVs as we have that hangover from the removal of the tax credits towards the end of last year in Q4. But we could see a little bit of pickup towards the end of the year, especially with one factor being, lease returns. We had a lot of EVs being leased around, 3 years ago. So as some of those consumers come back, it is a question, are they going to, go for another EV? Are they going to switch to a different technology? But there's certainly still a lot of potential there for EVs to still, for at least that volume to kind of hold up. But I think the real winner, we're going to see is full hybrids. You see something like the new Toyota RAV4 being hybrid as standard. And really what we see overall is that rather than the sort of the non-ICE part of the market, if I can put it that way, being maybe around 25% last year. We see that being more like 33% this year. So going from 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 being some kind of electrified vehicle, but with the full range of hybrids, from mild hybrids to plug-in hybrids to full hybrids, being a really key component of that, as well as that remaining BEV share.
Some closing thoughts, some supplier strategy takeaways. What are some actionable insights when you think about suppliers and the themes that really should anchor this year?
I think, yeah, it'll just come back to kind of what I said earlier, just, making sure they're keeping an eye on events that are going on, politically in the news, in the industry, but without panicking. I think trying to be as prepared ahead of time as possible, but also having, the sense that nothing is settled until everything is agreed with regards to USMCA or other potential policy changes. But I think just to, keep an even keel, know that there's no reason to think that we won't see another pretty decent year from a sales perspective. That should keep the industry ticking over. So not to be overly pessimistic, but I think just to also be aware there are risks, as there always are in the industry, but just to keep going and not overreact to anything that may come along in the news.
Well, I'm sure there will be plenty that will come along in the news, but appreciate you framing it for us in the way that you have. David Oakley, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thanks for having me, Jason. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again to my guest, David Oakley, Manager America's Vehicle Sales Forecasting for GlobalData. Thanks for joining us on this program, and you can find a library of these episodes on your favorite podcast platform. I'm your host, Jason Stein. We'll see you again next time.